Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar that was organized by altmetric in partnership with AMRC. Altmetric is part of Digital Science, who is an AMRC supporter. So for those of you who haven't met me yet, I joined AMRC 2 months ago as the Impact Officer. And one of my goals here is to help our members learn about developments in impact evaluation and reporting. So some charities might find that a product like altmetric could help them track outputs from projects they funded, as well as discover who is talking about their research all in real time. My understanding is that it could even be potentially used to identify emerging fields or experts, inform strategic decisions, or refine outreach strategies. So during this webinar, Teresa from altmetric will be talking about what data is provided, how it's captured and presented, and she will discuss the attention score metric and answer any questions you might have. And then Teresa Lee from the International Association for Cancer Research will share her experience of using the altmetric Explorer platform, and she will share how they plan to use the data in the future. So I hope you'll find this useful, and please feel free to get in touch with me after with any questions or thoughts. You can send me an email at j.leblanc@amrc.org.uk. So with that, I will hand things over to Teresa. Or Kat. Actually, Kat.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I think I said Teresa from altmetric. I meant Kat from altmetric.
No problem. Thank you, Jocelyn. And hi, everyone. I am Kat from altmetric. Thanks very much for joining us today for this webinar, Altmetrics in Practice, an introduction and case study for AMRC members. We hope you find it useful and that it prompts some interesting questions. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get too far into content. If you do have any questions, please just type them in the Q&A box. We'll get to them at the end, and I'm sure Teresa would be happy to answer any that you'd like to ask her. Let us know if you can't hear or see. Hopefully there won't be any problems, but if there are, just ping us in the chat or in the Q&A and we'll do what we can to help. And the webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to review it afterwards or share it with colleagues if that's of interest. So today, as I've mentioned, hi, I'm Kat. I'm from altmetric in London. And also as a guest speaker, we have Teresa Lee from the International Association for Research on Cancer. So thanks very much to Teresa for joining us. She's got a really interesting presentation lined up for you all. And what we'll cover, so I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to altmetric, what it is, how we collect the data and what it shows. And then also more specifically how it can be useful to you as funders. Teresa will then present a case study of using altmetric within her organisation, and then as mentioned we'll move on to a Q&A session at the end. So what is altmetric? Well, we're based in London and we're relatively small, there's about 25 of us, and really we're a data science company. We're actually a portfolio of digital science, which as Jocelyn mentioned, is a supporter of AMRC. And digital science invests in technology startups that serve different parts of the research workflow. So some of the tools that it is involved with sit at the very beginning of that, so running experiments in the lab, for example, or identifying where funding is going perhaps, whereas altmetric kind of sits more towards the end, so evaluating the outcomes of your research and understanding their reach and influence. So altmetrics is quite a popular term. Over the last few years, it's kind of really spread through the bibliometrics community and beyond. But the term altmetrics really means any indicator of the online engagement that surrounds published research outputs. And they're not designed to replace traditional citation impact metrics. They're really designed to complement them and help you tell the bigger story around what is happening with the research that you support. So altmetrics capture things like discussions on post-publication peer review platforms, references from Wikipedia to research outputs, commentary on social media, so where things get shared on Twitter or perhaps on Facebook or on LinkedIn. Coverage in the news media and blogs, so where has research that you've supported been mentioned by the BBC, for example, or in an online news site. Citations in non-journal sources, so policy documents are a big one for us here, so you can really start to see where the research that you've funded is being picked up by policymakers, and engagement on scholarly platforms, so places like F1000. And when we say a research output, we don't just mean a journal article. We realise that research outputs come in many diverse forms. So it can be a journal article, but it could also be someone talking about a data set or sharing a link to a clinical trial paper, etc. So it can really help you see not just what are people saying about the final outcomes of the projects that you support, but what are they saying at the very early stages? How is that research being received, and what are they engaging with it for? And then we pull all of that attention together into something that we call the altmetrics details page. So this is a page that we create for each research output that we find attention for. And you can click through all of the tabs on this page to actually read the original mentions. So it's really important to remember that altmetrics aren't just about numbers. It's really about understanding who is talking about the research and why they're saying it. On the left-hand side here, you can see what we call the altmetric donut and attention score. The donut you can often find embedded in publisher journal article pages, for example, and it's designed to provide a visual indicator of where the item has received attention from. So the colours change depending on which sources the item has been mentioned in. So red is always news, yellow is always blogs. If it's been shared on Twitter, it will always be light blue. So you'll see different versions of this donut depending on where attention has been found for the output. And then the attention score in the middle is designed to provide an indicator of the volume and the likely reach of that attention. So each attention source contributes a different set amount to the score. And the higher the score, the more attention something has received. So it's not a measure of quality by any means. Please remember that. It's really important. It's just designed to help you identify where there is attention that might be worth exploring further. Also on this page, you can find things like demographic data. So you can see where in the world people are tweeting the research, for example. You can see where in the world people have used Mendeley to save it to their PDF libraries. And we also provide a bit of a scoring context information. So you can see, okay, this article has a score of over 3,000, but how does that compare to other research outputs in the same journal or that were published around the same time? So it's really designed to help you understand more about why people are engaging with this research and what they're saying about it and what might that mean for how it's being received or the influence it might have. You can sign up to receive alerts as new mentions are found, or you can of course click through to view it on the publisher site, and whether that's a repository or a kind of more commercial publisher, that link will take you there. And there's a lot of data, so there's a huge amount of activity that goes on online with people sharing research and commenting on it and writing their own reviews of it. At the moment, we see around 18,000 unique research outputs shared every day. And of those 18,000 unique outputs, we see about 155,000 new mentions a day. So a huge amount of conversation is going on, which equates to a mention every 0.7 seconds. So as you can imagine, kind of tracking, collating and pulling all of this data together is a big task. And that's why it's so useful to be able to see it all in one place, because it can really help you stay on top of who's saying what about the projects that you're involved with. And then those details pages really kind of form the core of of the data that we provide. The details pages can be accessed, as I mentioned, through the badges that you see here on the left, which you'll typically find embedded in publisher websites, for example. We have a platform called the Altmetric Explorer, which Teresa will talk about. And this is really our database of all of the attention that we've ever found for all of the research outputs that we know about. A research output gets added to the database as we find attention for it. So we don't necessarily need to be told about everyone or anything. As long as we're tracking the domain where the research output gets published, we'll pick up any new attention and figure out which article that mention is about. And then just on the right, we also offer an API. So if you're interested in integrating our data into other reporting or other systems that you already have within your organization, the API allows you to conduct more custom queries or to integrate it there. And we work with a huge range of publishers, funders, institutions, government and other organizations around the world. This is just a small selection. It spreads across geographies. We have quite a few clients in Australia. Increasingly in the US, we're getting a lot of interest from people like the CDC. In the last year, we started working very closely with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. but also people like the Smithsonian and the World Bank, who've really been exploring the kind of the non-article outputs that we track, and how we can help them see the attention and the engagement that surround their reports or their books or their other outputs, which has been really interesting for us and hopefully really useful for them. So how can this data be useful for funders? There are lots of questions that altmetrics can help you with, and I'm hoping you might have started to think of some already. So they can help you not just understand who is talking about the work that you fund, but what they actually think about it and why they're choosing to engage with it. Using something like the Explorer can help you see more broadly what discussions are going on in a particular field. They might even help you identify new researchers or early career researchers that you might like to work with or invite to apply for a grant. Along that line, if perhaps one of the criteria for one of the grants you're awarding is that there is a significant amount of public engagement or public outreach, altmetrics can help you see which researchers are good at communicating their research to a broader audience, even if you're just looking for people who might be able to help researchers that you're already working with, give them some tips perhaps for how they could improve in that respect. They can also help you see where you might want to focus on growing engagement. So if you see that other research in a particular field is getting a lot of traction in certain news sources or with certain policymakers, altmetrics can help you identify what those sources are, and then build strategies, of course, to reach out to those people and improve your focus on those areas, if that's what you decide to do in line with your objectives, of course. And then they can really just help you understand how your projects are having an impact beyond the academy. So I mentioned that altmetrics were designed to be complementary to traditional citation metrics, and they really are designed to show you that bigger picture. So not just what other faculty or other researchers saying about this work, but how is it being received and understood by that broader audience, or is it being understood? And if not, who should you be looking to engage with to make that happen? One thing that we often find funders are particularly interested in is the impact on public policy. So at altmetric, we track a wide range of policy sources, such as the World Health Organization, the UK government websites, for example. And we look through the policy documents that they produce and check them for references that we can then link back to specific research outputs. So in this example, you can see that there was this Biomed Central article that was published. It was picked up by us. We found attention on Twitter for it. It's had some citations from Scopus, which we're able to pull into the Explorer as well, so you get a bit of an idea of the academic impact. But then also it's been referenced in a policy document that has come from NICE. So it's really interesting to see how, the funding that went into that project, and then this is the research that came out of it, and then this is the influence that it has had on how a policymaker is advising the general public. But as with any metric, it's really important to be responsible. So please remember that altmetrics are an indicator. They're not the full story. Certainly, you need to always be clicking on the donut to see exactly what people are saying. Our high score indicates a lot of attention, not that that attention is there for a positive reason. And altmetrics are really designed to complement expert opinion and other metrics. So they should never be used as a standalone measure of an output or as a standalone measure of a researcher, of course. So it's really important to look beyond the numbers and really dig into those conversations to understand who's talking about something and why. So with that, I'll hand over to Teresa.
Great. Thanks very much, Kat. Is the sound okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Great. And if you don't mind advancing my slides, thanks very much. So just a bit about IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. Next slide, please. We're the specialized cancer research agency of the WHO, World Health Organization. And our mandate is to promote international collaboration in cancer research for cancer prevention. We're a relatively small agency at about 300 staff members, and we're in the midst of our medium-term strategy at the moment, which is why we had turned to altmetric as a possible tool for evaluating this medium-term strategy. Next slide. Thanks. So why altmetric at IARC? I guess Kat has covered many of the excellent reasons for looking at altmetric as a possible tool. For us, we wanted to go beyond the traditional KPIs that are reported annually. It was felt that as the main purpose of the medium-term strategy evaluation is to demonstrate the impact of the agency's activities, and that going beyond the annual program of KPIs would be desirable. So reasons why we were interested, as Kat mentioned, the ability to track attention in policy sources was a high priority for us, as having an impact on national policy is something we're very interested in. Tracking attention to IARC's books output was also important. In other words, looking beyond just the journal articles that we put out each year. The immediacy of altmetrics was also attractive, given that the period in which the publications being covered would be from 2016 realistically to middle of 2018. And of course, the wide use and recognizability of altmetric and application to media monitoring were also pluses. Next slide. So you can see an example here of Google Scholar. This is actually the top ranking agency output at the moment. And as you can tell, it also has a significant, it's built up a relatively sizable number of scholarly articles that cite it. Next slide. And here's the corresponding article record in IARC's altmetric dashboard. So beyond the colorful donut and the fact that the number is higher, which in itself doesn't tell you much, what is interesting and useful for us is the fact that it's been mentioned by 10 policy sources, and it also then lists which sources these are. It's also useful to know more about the attention score in context. So for example, to know that its attention score is ranked 8 out of nearly 25,000 other Lancet articles tracked by altmetric. Next slide. I'd like to move to an adjacent topic for a moment and talk a little bit about the technical work required to implement an altmetric subscription. Part of the reason for this is that the technical aspects of implementation have occupied most of my time when it comes to altmetrics so far. But the other reason is that as an academic librarian in my previous role, I've been witness to the failure of another research metric tool, largely for the reason that not enough attention was given to its implementation and upkeep. So simply put, what is at the heart of the altmetric system is the unique identifier. So you see the green zone in the middle for an article, book, or any other research output. This is essentially what allows mentions of your output to be recorded and then subsequently analyzed. Next slide. This repeats what Kat has already said, but this is the altmetric donut in action on one of our publicly viewable records of an IARC flagship publication. Next slide. And then complementing this is the Altmetric Explorer institutional dashboard as it looks for us. So this is the dashboard that offers up the data and reports on your institution's outputs, as well as on the totality of altmetrics records. Next slide. So I have this picture too as a metaphor for the process of claiming, whereby an institution has to claim its publications. This is an essential part of getting your dashboard set up. Next slide. So the process by which an institution can claim its publications and report them to altmetric will vary according to the systems involved. For IARC, this was largely a process of pulling metadata, so in other words, bibliographic data about our publications, from various internal systems and then arranging them in a very specific spreadsheet format that was required by altmetric. So without getting into too many technical details, there are various components that we had to factor into our implementation in order for the donuts to begin appearing on our publication site, and more importantly, for us to be able to start seeing our own data and using the dashboard. So this is a view that is a little bit more complex than the tripartite structure that you saw before, but it's a bit more realistic in terms of the metadata work involved. Next slide. This metaphor comes from a librarian colleague and friend of mine. Who said that salespeople always make it sound like the metadata validation process is a walk through a rose garden, and often people who have done it make it sound like scaling Mount Everest, when in fact it's a long hike up a hill. So enough to keep you a bit out of breath, but not impossible by any stretch of the imagination. So why am I saying all these things? Because I think I'm really adamant that there be some thought to this end of the process, as the way that you report metadata will then have an impact on the kind of data that is available on the dashboard, and also inform the kinds of analyses that can be done. Next slide. So challenges and next steps for us. As Kat alluded, there's a fundamental limitation in all metrics. They are proxies for quality and impact. To read more about the principles involved in using metrics tools, I highly recommend having a look at the Leiden Manifesto for Research Metrics. What we're struggling with at IARC is this strange paradox in that in some cases there's an incompleteness of data versus too many ways to slice and dice the data that is available. What I mean by the incompleteness of data is that, for example, we know that our flagship publication, the monographs on the evaluation of carcinogenic risk, have garnered many mentions, but due to the complexity of tracking book mentions, not all of this data is captured. Another part of the challenge is the setting baselines for future analyses. So this is something that I am working through with a colleague. And I'll explain a bit more in a moment what that means. We're also having to make choices at this point about aspects of metrics analysis to outsource versus doing in-house. And of course, communications and training is also a big piece that we need to tackle so that other colleagues here can make best use of altmetric. Next slide. So as I mentioned before, there is this paradox of the data being incomplete. And again, for IARC, the main problem here is that it's difficult to match up mentions of books with the books themselves. At the same time, there's a huge number of ways that we can slice and dice the data that is provided through altmetric. One of the key things to remember when looking at publication-related metrics is that the numbers themselves don't mean anything. They only make sense when contextualized and compared. So either across similar peer institutions or across time within your own organization. And this was what I meant by setting up the baselines. There's a particular feeling of pressure here at the moment because we realize that we're building a methodology that will be built on chronologically going forward. So the challenge of presenting quantitative data from altmetric, or really from anywhere, in a way that is transparent, rational, relatively easy to understand, and supportive of the broader impact narrative that we want to tell is what IARC is currently grappling with. Thank you very much. I'll leave it there for now.
Lovely, thank you, Teresa. I think it's really interesting for people to hear about your experience. I think just following your presentation, I'll go into the platform briefly so people can get a bit of an idea by what you mean about the setup. Hopefully let me just make sure you can all see the right part of my screen. I'll do this now. So if I log into the altmetric database, within the database, anyone that has a subscription to it can see the altmetric attention for anything that we've ever picked up mentions for. So not just your own organizations either produced research or supported research, but any from any organization. So if I just go to, let me see, I think it's called Lilliput Foundation, which is essentially our test funder instance. Oh, I can't find the foundation. I've got the university here. So this is the Explorer. As Teresa showed, this is where you can see all of the outputs. You can either just have access to the basic database, or you can set up what IARC have set up, which is where you can reflect the structure of your organization or the projects that you support. So you can see here, this is set up for a university, but you might want to set it up to list your grant-funded projects and then tie the associated publications or other outputs to them. So here, for example, you can see that this author, if I were to click view results, we would see all of the research outputs that altmetric have picked up attention for that Benilde has authored. And then because this is a university instance that I'm in here, it's split by departments. But you could split this by funding area, by project or groups, or however you wanted to break it down. Or you don't have to do the implementation to this extent, and you can just have access to the full database, where you can always use the advanced search to search for specific lists of papers or for items from specific journals, for example. So there's lots of different ways to get into the data. But I think Teresa's points about the metadata and the work that does go into setting up, if you want that kind of project view, is achievable, but certainly there. But it does help you get that additional value, so you can really, quickly report on individual projects or on other initiatives that you're involved in. So thanks very much, Teresa, for your presentation. Let me just see if we have any questions. I can't see any for now, I don't think. I had one for you though, Teresa, actually. I was really interested to see that you had also embedded the badges in your public platform. What was the motivation behind doing that?
Well, mostly for the purposes of marketing. It's something that I think, well, the kind of audience that we have, the STM audience, again, I think many of them recognize the donut and understand what it means. So it was another way to draw attention, public attention, and give people a view as to where the attention is coming from.
And before you had altmetric, you mentioned being really interested to see the policy mentions. Were you doing any tracking of where your research was being picked up in policy, or is that something that this has enabled that wasn't happening before?
Right. So definitely the latter. We weren't doing it, in any kind of manual way ourselves, and that's what attracted us to altmetric. However, we've discovered that again, the problem of tracking mentions in books, that's a significant problem, and luckily for us, we have a bit of a workaround in that the flagship book publication that we want to track, whenever a new volume comes out, we actually end up producing a summary of the monograph in Lancet Oncology, which has turned out to be very fortunate for us in terms of the altmetric tool, because where the book donut score may not truly reflect the amount and the kind of attention, the Lancet Oncology summary can serve as kind of a proxy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think, like you say, it is important to always be aware of the scope of the data that you're looking at and any limitations that might be there. And do you know, how does your organization hope kind of in the future to benefit from altmetric data? Obviously it sounds like you're just in the early days of starting to look at it, but are you hoping to use it to help guide your publication strategy or your funding? Or
well, the most immediate thing for us is this report to our governing body. So showing the impact to our governing body was really the primary reason. But I think that in terms of sort of creative ideas that you suggested for showing the impact to funders or looking at areas of growth, these could all be very good applications.
Great, okay. We haven't had any other questions come in, so if no one has any, I think we'll probably leave it there for today. But if you would like to ask anything else or think of anything afterwards, please do get in touch at info@altmetric.com. We've got a couple of things in the chat box. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Emma. Glad you enjoyed it. And thanks very much to Teresa and to Jocelyn, of course, for hosting us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We hope to speak to you all soon.
Bye, Kat.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.